right. Good morning, everyone. Tomorrow is the last day to vote in Michigan's presidential primary, Tuesday, February 27th. And I am very pleased to announce that already in this presidential primary in Michigan, more than 1 million voters have already participated and made their voices heard. That's significant because it's a 13% higher pre-election day turnout than we saw in 2020. So it's 13% more election day votes in 2024 than in 2020. And it really is a reflection of voter enthusiasm and also of Michigan's expanded voting options. Notably, in 2020, Michiganders could only cast their ballot early through the mail or at a drop box, through voting at home or returning it at their clerk's office. So this year, what's different is that Michiganders can cast their votes in person through early voting. And so the increase in turnout can in many ways be directly attributed to the increase of an option, the additional option of early voting here in Michigan in 2024. Now, yesterday was the final day of Michigan's first ever statewide in-person early voting period, leading up to Election Day. Over this initial 9-day early voting period all across the state, more than 78,000 Michigan citizens turned out to exercise this particular new option. Close to 20,000 of those votes were cast in the final weekend, just Saturday and Sunday, this past Saturday and Sunday. And the highest turnout day was yesterday, Sunday, the last day, the 25th of February, where more than 11,000 citizens participated in early voting. What that also tells us is that the more citizens hear about early voting as an option, the more likely they are to take advantage of it. And so the increase in turnout yesterday over all of the other days really reflects also the push that clerks like Clerk Segrest and others did over the period to make sure citizens knew about this option. And that's not all. As of this morning, more than 927,000 citizens have completed and submitted their vote through the mail. Through an absentee ballot, they returned their ballot either in person at their clerk's office, at a drop box, or through the mail, and it's been received. For comparison, the total number of citizens who cast an absentee ballot in the 2020 presidential primary was just over 882,000. So in other words, we've also seen an increase in those citizens choosing to vote from home or absentee by more than 45,000 voters over 2020. And for a presidential primary, where each major party has a candidate with a commanding lead, we're still approaching half of the total turnout before Election Day for the entire 2020 presidential primary, when in that primary, nearly 2.4 million citizens overall participated and voted. So between in-person early voting and absentee voting in Michigan, 13% of Michigan's active registered voters have already voted, excluding inactive voters who are slated for future cancellation. The vote totals on those ballots will be generated tomorrow on Election Day after the polls close. And so that's an important point that I want to make. While we know the number of ballots that have been cast at this point, results will not be tabulated, calculated, revealed, or in any way even known before 8 p.m. on Election Day itself. Now, overall, this is great news for our state. The robust early voting turnout shows that Michigan citizens are engaged in this process and are making sure their voice is heard. And it shows that Michigan voters, when they have options to vote, they embrace those options. Citizens have overwhelmingly supported efforts to allow no reason absentee voting and to require at least 9 days of early in-person voting for state and federal elections. That's been reflected by the fact that it's been citizens themselves who, through ballot initiatives in 2018 and in 2022, created these options for themselves. And we as election administrators and clerks are proud to be able to fulfill their will by making both in-person early voting and no reason absentee voting a reality for all. And as with no reason absentee voting, I expect in-person early voting to also become more and more popular as more citizens learn about their options and become accustomed to Michigan having several election days rather than just one election day. There is precedent for this. The largest county in Illinois, Cook County, instituted in-person early voting in 2006. In that year, 4.9% of voters voted early. The second election to have early voting in that location, in 2008, we saw early voting turnout increase to 20%, almost 22%, and it's remained at that or above that level in years after. I had the opportunity to visit many early voting sites over the last 9 days, and I really want to thank the clerks and election workers who did an excellent job with this new experience for all of us. It was a lot of work under tight timelines, but our clerks got the job done. And in the end, it is the voters of Michigan and our democracy that benefits as a result of their hard work. One of those clerks is here today, Clerk Michael Segrest of Canton Township. He did an extraordinary job leading the way through a lot of thoughtful work and voter outreach, preparing for early voting in his community, and I invited him here today to share his experience. Clerk Segrest, could you share with us how early voting went in your community?
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Segrest. I am the clerk in Canton Township, and I'm extremely happy to be here with you as we closed out the 9 days of early voting and we prepare for Election Day tomorrow. What an exciting time to be a clerk, and what a really cool time to be a voter in the state of Michigan. In 2022, voters passed Proposal 2, which included 68% of the citizens of Canton Township. Voters were eager to expand their rights, making voting more accessible, more inclusive, and more secure. Since 2022, we've been working with the Department of State and the Bureau of Elections to prepare for the launch of early voting. Throughout that time, we all engaged the legislature on developing laws to create a framework around early voting. Once we finally had the rules in place, the Department of State and the Bureau of Elections coordinated with us local clerks in the procedure-making process and technology development that was going to be required to get the job done. Over the last 9 days, poll workers in Canton have enjoyed a live early voting poll book that tracks voter status in real time. This was a critical tool in Canton Township where we had 2 early voting sites. Voter education became our #1 mission. We mailed a notice to all voters with the early voting site locations, dates, and times. We even advertised it in our community center brochure that gets mailed to every resident in Canton Township. We began an aggressive social media campaign that was used to try to create a culture around early voting, an option Michigan voters had never seen before. I can tell you, I've never seen this level of excitement in voters as they go into the early voting site and cast their ballot for the first time. The poll workers love the new tools. Canton implemented ballot on demand, which allowed us to be more efficient and intentional by printing a ballot directly for a voter. The state appropriated roughly $30 million last year to help us acquire the new equipment that is needed to get the job done. In Canton, we were able to do a line tracking study with the new equipment, which is going to allow us to look at the hours that are convenient around a voter's schedule so that we can prepare for November to make sure that when we are offering early voting is when the citizens want to early vote. I've been a clerk since 2016. I've known nothing but change and some challenges. Every election brings new challenges. But what is clear, after the massive effort to implement early voting and all of the reforms of Proposal 2, is that both voters, poll workers, and clerks are going to be excited about this new option. The work ahead of us is to continue to promote early voting and ensure that voters are aware of this new method for future elections. Additionally, I encourage anybody with questions about early voting or how elections are run in general to visit the state's website at michigan.gov/vote. And you can always get the facts by contacting the office of your county or local clerk directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Clerk Segrest. I appreciate your hard work and the hard work of clerks all around the state. And as I mentioned, in-person early voting was approved by a ballot initiative in 2022 that amended our state constitution to mandate at least 9 days of early voting in statewide elections. Proposal 2 passed with a majority of support from voters all across the state, Democratic, Republican, Independent citizens alike. And Michael Davis Jr., the executive director of Promote the Vote Michigan, was a key part of that effort. Promote the Vote Michigan led the effort to get Proposal 2 on the ballot in 2022. and introduce early voting as an option with citizen support all across our state. He's here to share his thoughts on the state's first election with in-person early voting.
Thank you, Secretary. In 2021, we began planning, and in 2022, Promote the Vote, along with a coalition of 25-plus organizations, worked together, gathering signatures. These organizations represent thousands of Michiganders across the state. We were able to submit over 664,000 valid signatures from eligible Michigan voters to be able to put Proposal 2 on the ballot. And in November of 2022, 60% of Michiganders showed up to approve that ballot measure, removing barriers to voting and making our elections more secure and accessible. Providing early voting, along with other options, to offer the flexibility that voters want and need to make their voices heard. According to census data, the most common reason that voters give for not being able to cast their vote are due to work or school conflicts. Our new constitutional amendment, which guarantees 9 consecutive days of early voting, meets that issue head on. It gives voters who want to vote in person but can't make it to the polls on Election Day a voting option that works for them. The right to vote early is, of course, still relatively new here in Michigan, and we want every eligible voter to know that they have the right and the option to vote early, to go into an early voting site in or near their community and cast their vote, putting their ballot into the machine before Election Day. Again, if you need information on how to find your location, you can go to michigan.gov/vote. Nearly 80,000 Michiganders have already taken advantage of this option, and we hope to see even more Michigan voters using this convenient option in our upcoming elections. For that reason, Promote the Vote is actively working with our coalition partners to call, text, and talk to eligible voters and community members across the state. We're also running a Michigan call center within the 866 Our Vote nonpartisan election protection hotline so that voters can call and get accurate answers to any voting-related questions, including those about early voting, and report on voting-related issues. We'll be running this call center on Election Day and through the end of this week. I encourage voters to call the hotline, 866 Our Vote, if you have any questions or need to report any issues with voting. We'll be working closely with our partners, clerks, and NDOS to solve and address issues, voting-related issues, early voting, and otherwise. The Bureau of Elections, our city, township, and county clerks have worked tirelessly under tight timelines to ensure that Michigan voters can exercise their constitutional right to vote early. It wasn't easy, but their dedication means that voting is that much more accessible for all voters of Michigan. We are increasingly grateful for their efforts and look forward to working together to drive more pro-voter policies alongside the Secretary of State for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for your dedication to making sure Michigan voters have choices when it comes to participating in our elections. And thank you to all of our clerks who have really stepped up. Grateful for Clerk Segrest's optimistic view that it's a great time to be a clerk, because indeed it is. It's a challenging time as well, but it's one that really reflects the grit and determination of this incredible community in Michigan of over 1,500 local clerks and 83 county clerks who work every day to make elections like this smooth and successful for every citizen. And I want to close with a couple of things. I want to recognize the city of Detroit, where we saw the highest number of voters participating early and absentee, and also the city of Ann Arbor, where we saw the greatest percentage of eligible citizens voting absentee or early. In both of those communities, alongside Canton, where we also saw a significant bounce in turnout over 2020, I think those clerks are to be commended for the additional work that they did to go above and beyond, educating their citizens about these options and ensuring citizens had multiple ways to vote during this early voting period. Now, as we look to tomorrow, Election Day, we have our in-person Election Day option available to all citizens. While early voting is closed and while the last time a citizen can request their absentee ballot is 4 o'clock today, tomorrow, polls will be open all across the state in local precincts from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. Notably, if you still have your absentee ballot and you haven't returned it, you can return it to your local clerk's office or to a secure drop box in your local community before 8 p.m. tomorrow, and it will count. If you aren't registered to vote, you can still register to vote and cast a ballot at your local clerk's office. Be sure to bring proof of residency to your clerk's office today or tomorrow before 8 p.m., and you can register and cast your vote all in one trip. To find your local clerk's office or your nearest absentee ballot drop box or your election day precinct and polling place, you can go to michigan.gov/vote. Whatever option you choose to participate in our presidential primary, however you choose to cast your ballot, Michigan's elections are always administered by nonpartisan professionals like Clerk Segrist, who are committed to ensuring not just that every voice is heard and not only that every vote is counted, but that our elections are safe, secure, and that the results are counted accurately. We expect to have final unofficial results by noon on Wednesday, hopefully sooner, and we'll certainly keep you posted. But notably, no results are available until the polls close all across our state, which for the most part, because we have 3 areas of the state that are in Central Time, will be 9 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Although for the vast majority of citizens, polls will close at 8 p.m. All polls close at 8 p.m. local time. We just also have to recognize there are some locations in central in Michigan, and for that reason, nothing will be released prior to 9 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. So I'm happy to open it up for a few questions, and I look forward to seeing you all throughout the day tomorrow for additional voting information and updates. Yes.
Secretary Benson was wondering what you had heard in terms of rural turnout for these early voting sites. There was also some commentary just kind of about how common polling places are, throughout the geographic area, densely versus less populated areas. So just kind of the rural perspective on early voting.
Yeah, I think first it's important to know that every citizen has easy access to their ballot through the mail or getting it at their clerk's office throughout the absentee voting period, which starts long before early voting. For that in-person early voting option, every locality had 3 options, either going countywide, partnering with varying neighboring municipalities, or just going in on their own as a municipality. So for rural areas, many times this meant allowing the county to determine the locations or choosing that route, or having one location for several municipalities. For rural voters, that may mean they have to drive a longer distance to get to their early voting location. For those concerned about that, the offset is the absentee voting option, where they can return it through the mail or at a local drop box. And notably, there is one drop box for every 15,000 citizens in this state. So drop boxes are plentiful and secure for every citizen to access. So recognizing that there are many diverse ways in which Michiganders choose to vote, and also that there are many diverse needs for citizens in urban areas and rural areas, the collection of 3 options really does ensure that no matter where a person is situated, they can choose an option that's most convenient for them.
Secretary
Yes.
Benson, does your office have any estimates on the overall cost early voting was for the state? And also, to piggyback off of what you were just saying, are there any lessons learned that you're taking into future 2024 elections and beyond?
Yeah, we're still looking at the information on costs. I know we'll get that to you as clerks report out their specific expenditures for this period. What we'll then do with that information once we have an assessment of how what clerks' expenditures were versus what was allocated is be able to make a clearer estimate for August and November as to what our funding allocation is going to be. The bottom line is our partnership at the statewide level is secure with our clerks, and we find it to be our responsibility to ensure they can cover their costs through state funding or other sources of funding. And Clerk Segrist, I don't know if you want to comment on that either way in terms of costs, but the bottom line for us is that this is a mandate from voters that the state has a responsibility to help fund. We'll continue to help fund it and ensure that that we have a sufficient number of people staffed and that the voter education materials are effective, mailings and the like, for citizens to know their options and know where to vote early. The last thing I'll add on terms of the shifting estimate of costs is that this first effort for early voting carries with it more
need to educate citizens through mailings and the like about where to vote early and also set up costs, machines, training, that sort of thing. We anticipate those costs will diminish as we go through not just this year but future years with early voting, which is another thing we're working into our estimates. So all that to say is we're still getting the specific data points as to what expenditures were made. Early voting just ended yesterday, but we know clerks were able to meet their in this primary, and that will also give us information as to how to allocate funding for the primary in August and the general election in November. Clerk Segrest, did you want to add anything to that on funding or costs? Or
I could talk for a little bit. Sure. Yeah, so I would just kind of point back to the comments I had made earlier about the legislative appropriation of roughly $30 million for the one-time kind of cost of a substantial amount of the equipment that was used in this election, and I believe to cover a lot of the payroll from this election, or the cost for administering it with the inspectors. So yeah, we'll have the ongoing costs, and then there is the one-time administrative costs for the for voter education, which was I had asked my local jurisdiction to set aside roughly $30,000 for voter education for this year in total, because for me, early voting is abundantly clear will be an investment as we begin to get, if we can get up to the 20-30% turnout for early voting. What that's going to do is relieve a substantial amount of pressure on election day, which is substantially the most costly form of administering elections, is having voting in place in all of the precincts on election day. So we'll be looking at the data before we make decisions about the long-term costs or benefits in Canton Township. We'll prioritize efficiency, but we'll also prioritize access. We're not interested in ensuring that individuals, you make it more difficult to vote on election day. But we definitely want to look at that. It's extremely premature to know what the cost is right now for early voting.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important as you cover this, and as Clerk Segrest emphasized, there's a shifting of costs that's going to evolve as well away from election day into early voting based on voter behavior that we've been tracking as well with the implementation of no reason absentee voting as well as more voters choose that route. And so we'll be able to make those determinations throughout the year, consolidating precincts, which clerks may choose to do as a result of a shift, which enables clerks to shift those costs. So it's going to be difficult to say this much, and this much for each option, because those will be moving targets, but we will be able to also provide post-election assessments of how costs were allocated to give you an opportunity to track that funding. Other questions? Yes.
Ken Coleman from
Yeah.
Madam Secretary. I'm curious, we talked about the education process, Clerk Segrest, you talked about that. I imagine, this being the first time for this new option on the menu, any conversations or contemplation from a local level, Mr. Clerk or Secretary Clerk, about working with school districts to provide the education around this new option for young people as they become voting age, and obviously some high schoolers are voting age?
Yes, I'll say three things on that. First, the proactive voter education that we are doing this year on all fronts to make sure citizens know all their options to vote will be coming not just from our office, but a number of partners as well, through the voter confidence councils that we're creating all across the state, as well as our statewide council. The members of those council and partners there include business leaders, corporate leaders, community leaders, labor leaders, and educational leaders. We have found, by and large, principals, teachers, and school district leadership, superintendents, and the like, to be abundantly supportive and helpful in getting the word out and having ideas. The same applies to the collegiate level as well. So we'll be announcing and rolling out those specific things we'll be doing to engage our young voters and our new voters around these options and making sure they know their options. We also they'll likely be targeted with misinformation and other tactics, and we want to prepare and shield them from that as well. So working with education partners and other partners throughout the state to establish and disseminate that information will be key. The second thing we're doing already, and I invite you and others to observe one of these, are every week, every Friday, we seek to do a mock election at a local school. And we've done one in Detroit already at Emerson High School. We've done one in Lake Orion and other places. We'll be doing those throughout the state, and those are a lot of fun, and probably great to cover because we walk these young future and current voters through the process of voting early, absentee voting, and then we encourage them to think about or ask their parents to think about serving as election workers as well to be part of the process. It's been great, and maybe we'll come to Canton and do one, but we'll invite you to come and observe one of them. They're really inspiring and exciting. And then that links to the third thing, which is that in the summer we'll roll out pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, which is now a law. It'll go into effect and fully operational later this summer, and then in the fall that will enable us to go to high schools and begin the pre-registration process. We also have other things planned, like the use of our mobile offices, taking them to college campuses to educate and engage citizens, not just in voting, but getting their licenses and ID. So we've got a lot planned. It's not lost on me that Michigan led the nation in youth voter turnout in 2022, yet it was still just 37% of young voters participating. And that number we want to see increase this year, and we've got a lot of plans in place, like the ones I mentioned, to get us there. Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, thanks guys. We'll see you all throughout the days ahead, I'm sure.